he might want to register his boat. So he filled them out, sent them off, came, took the course, and went, oh man, goes home and gets a bill for 25 bucks. First time in so many years he's ever had to pay anything for his boat. Because once he split that title, they could now start charging him for him, bit by bit by bit. So again, when we look at that, we need to look at this in relation if it is your labor that's inside this property circle, because your labor is your property. Your thoughts are your own property. So when we start looking at that, keep that in mind as we progress to get more in depth onto the income tax system. But here's the one right, your free will. To truly understand those inalienable rights we just talked about, you need to respect and understand the power of your own free will. It's a lack of awareness of free will that has allowed the illusion to prosper to the point it is today. Free will is what has produced the life that you have now, and it's with greater awareness that you can create the life that you really want. This is about the most powerful thing about you, and they know it. And the last thing they want you to is really understand who you really are and the right of free will that you have. Because if you look at your life, have you ever noticed that everything that has caused you grief and frustration, you actually had to apply for it first? Think about it. How many people applied for a social insurance card, driver's license, this, that? If these things were all mandatory, why'd you have to apply for them? Why'd they need your signature? Because they know who you are and they know the limits they have and they need you to voluntarily enslave yourself. So that's what we hope by looking at who you are and the rights that you have, we can actually go in and you can start, again, putting your life back in balance. You'll start seeing some of these benefit programs aren't bad, but are they what you really want? Okay, so it can't be overstated, the power of one's own free will. So when we looked at that, it's just like I'm up here saying this is who you are, these are the rights that you have. Well, does the system acknowledge that or recognize that? Sure, if we go through our system, nothing's changed. The only thing that's changed is we forgot who we really were. Here's a historical recognition of the real you. This comes from Blackstone Commentaries. He was a Chief Justice of the Court of Common Pleas in England around the middle of the 18th century. It was about 500 years after the signing of the Magna Carta, which is probably one of the first, quote, quote, human rights documents. Okay? And what he noticed in England about 500 years later, guess what? The people were forgetting who they were and the rights that they had. So he took it upon himself to write these Blackstone Commentaries, and they're just to try to re-educate the people of England of who they really were. We go into there, in book 1, I believe it is, he goes, he named the 3 absolute rights as being the right of personal liberty, the right of personal security, and the right to property. He goes on to talk more about your right to property. He goes, the 3rd absolute right inherent in every Englishman is that of property, which consists of the free use, the enjoyment, and disposal of all his acquisitions, all his property, without control or diminution, taken away, taxation. Saved only by the laws of the land, and the laws of England are therefore, in point of honor and justice, extremely watchful in ascertaining and protecting this right. And upon this principle, the Great Charter of Magna Carta, Section 39 declares it, because this was 500 years after this was signed. Section 39 of the Magna Carta goes, no free man shall be arrested or imprisoned or deceased, have his property taken or outlawed, taken outside the protection of the common law, or exiled or in any way victimized. Neither will we attack him or send anyone to attack him except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. What's the law of the land? Must be proven before a jury of peers that one did damage or imminent threat of damage to person or property. Wouldn't that be nice if this still was in existence today? You were free and they couldn't touch your property or tax you or this, until you caused damage to somebody else? Section 40 of it is one line, but it's very, very powerful when we understand what it's really saying. It goes, to none will we sell, to none deny or delay right or justice. Because these are your rights, and that's why no one can sell them to you. Here's the federal recognition of you, 1960, out of the Canadian Bill of Rights. Preamble is really all you ever need to know to remain free in this country, if you really understand it. Actually, a 2nd paragraph, but I'm going to read the preamble. What it is, okay, it's the Parliament of Canada affirming that the Canadian nation is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the position of the family in the society of free men and free institutions. Affirming also that men and institutions remain free only when freedom is founded upon the respect for moral and spiritual values and the rule of law. It's the balancing factor. See, freedom isn't free because you got to respect other people's rights that they have. You got to find that balance. And so be desirous of enshrining these principles and the human rights and fundamental freedoms derived from them in a Bill of Rights which shall reflect the respect of Parliament for its constitutional authority and which shall ensure the protection of these rights and freedoms in Canada. So the federal government recognizes it. Section 1 on there just goes on to expand. It goes, it is hereby recognized and declared that in Canada there have existed See, that was 1960. Where did our rights have existed long before this? We don't even need it technically, and shall continue to exist without discrimination by reason of race, national origin, color, religion, or sex, the following human rights and fundamental freedoms, namely the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of person, and enjoyment of property, and the right not be deprived thereof except by due process of law. Isn't that what Section 39 of the Magna Carta just said? Except for in here they go to the enjoyment of property. So some people say, well, we're not allowed to have property anymore, but just we're allowed to enjoy it. How do you enjoy it if you don't have it? The reason they had to put enjoyment there is because our federal government has no jurisdiction over property, our property. So they couldn't even grant or deal with it, so they had to cover it up, put it something like the enjoyment of it in. Section 2 of the Canadian Bill of Rights. This is a 2-page statute law. This is literally, I think, is the most powerful legislation we have. It's not giving us anything, it's protecting us from the government. It is this 2-page statute law, which is the whole essence of what happened in my court case. Okay? Because it goes in here, Section 2 says, every law of Canada shall, unless it's expressly declared by an act of Parliament of Canada that shall operate notwithstanding, in spite of the Canadian Bill of Rights, be so construed and applied as not to abrogate, abridge, infringe, or to authorize the abrogation, abridgment, or infringement of any of the rights and freedoms herein recognized and declared. What that said in English is, unless you go inside a statute like this one, and you find in here, in prescribed form, an express declaration saying this is allowed to infringe on your human rights, then you can legally and safely assume that that thing doesn't apply to you because it doesn't say it's allowed to infringe on it. Here's the provincial recognition of the real you. See, what we're looking at is your human rights are the fundamental reasons this whole country was built. They're held above all. This is out of the Sang Chong case of 1909, way long before the illusion that we live in today was built, basically when things were what they were. What this was basically, I think Sang Chong was a produce vendor. He'd load up his cart with produce in the morning and go out in the streets and just sell, make a living. Like we all do. We wake up, we go to work. Well, City of Vancouver at that point started bringing in bylaws and said, well, on this day, you're not allowed to be on the street till 10:30 in the morning. He woke up, he went out before 10:30. They tried to fine him or whatever. It ended up in court. Here's what Justice Irving said in relation to that bylaw. He goes, among the normal rights which are available to every British subject against all the world are personal safety and freedom, one's good name, the enjoyment of the advantages ordinarily open to all the inhabitants of the country, so no discrimination, like the unmolested pursuit of one's trade or occupation. How many people here are told, need licenses to do what they want to do? Okay? Is that not like restricting in it? So how does that fit in? It's not like having someone come in and forcing to give you half your money, sort of an infringement on your trade or occupation. And the free use of our highways. Okay, that's a whole nother topic. I mean, think of what it costs you just to get your car on the road, let alone even drive it. All the rules and regulations that you got to first accomplish before you even get there. Freedom from malicious vexation of the legal process and to one's own property. So you're starting to see the same simplicity of what human rights are all about. He goes on to say the same thing, and here he goes. Where restraint is sought to be put upon any person in respect of the exercise of any of those natural rights, I think it's the duty of the court to assume that the legislature did not intend to interfere with them, unless clear and unequivocal words have been used. Is that not what Section 2 of the Canadian Bill of Rights just said? Unless you read it in there that your rights will be infringed upon, the courts will even assume that the thing didn't even apply to you. We look at the universal recognition of the real you, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This came out in 1948, after the Second World War, when we realized it's probably time we started growing up as human beings. We started seeing what we could actually do to each other and started realizing that that would result in no benefit for no one. Okay? The atrocities that happened during all that time. So out of the UN grew the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And it's really a great article to understand because your human rights are so inexhaustible list, it's really hard to even to think about them. So when you can find documents that actually helps your mind understand them, it's a little easier. It goes, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. We got to get to that point where we start realizing that we are all equal. So Article 1 states that. It goes, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. This here is probably the most powerful thing to even understand. If we're all born free and equal in dignity and rights, and somebody says that you're supposed to do something, don't you think you have the right to ask them where they get that authority? See, and that's when we realize we're all just the same, no one has natural authority or divine authority over you. And they are endowed with reason and conscience, should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. Okay, that balancing factor again. Article 3, everyone has the right to life,